I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into my own graduation banquet. People always assume disaster arrives with noise, with shouting or a sudden crash. But in my family, danger never storms in, it drifts quietly, it waits in the corners, and on the night that was supposed to crown the work I had spent years building, danger was waiting in a champagne glass. My name is Avery Morgan, 23, first-generation college graduate in a family that values appearances more than accomplishments. And if anyone ever asks when I realized my family was willing to rewrite my life for the sake of their preferred story, I would tell them it started with a familiar smile across a crowded ballroom and a hand that moved exactly when it should not have. The banquet was held at the Rosewood Pavilion, a place my parents loved because the chandeliers made everything look softer, warmer, richer. My mother always said lighting could hide flaws better than makeup. Ironic. The room glowed in gold and champagne tones, as if the celebration had been dipped in honey. Guests drifted like they were floating on the music coming from the string quartet in the corner. From the outside, it looked perfect. Inside, I felt the shift. Subtle, sharp, like the temperature dropped by a single degree. My father, Charles Morgan, was standing near my table. He wore the same crisp navy suit he reserved for fundraisers and public events, the ones where he played the devoted family man. He turned when he saw me enter, his smile widening in a way that felt one beat delayed. Then his hand moved. Slow, precise, hovering just above the glass set at my place setting. I watched the faint swirl of powder dissolve into the bubbles. No gasp, no outcry. I did not even blink. Years in this family had taught me the value of stillness. If you look shocked, you lose. If you look angry, you confirm whatever story they plan to tell about you. But if you remain calm, if you simply watch, you take control without anyone noticing the moment it happens. So I smiled. A soft, polite curve of my mouth, the kind that makes people believe everything is fine. At the center of the room, my sister Brielle was surrounded by admirers. Stunning, confident, effortlessly adored. People liked to say she could brighten a room just by walking in, and I used to wonder what it would feel like to be the person everyone turned toward. Tonight, I finally understood something else. Light can distract, but it can also blind. My mother stood beside her, beaming proudly, playing the role she had perfected my entire life. Supportive parent, loving mentor, guardian of the golden child. She glanced at me only once, and her expression held the same message it always did. Do not ruin this, as if I ever had. I walked toward my table, each step measured. When I reached the chair, I let my fingers trail along the rim of the champagne flute. The stem was cool, the bubbles whispered against the surface, and somewhere beneath them, Charles Morgan's plan waited for me to lift the glass. A toast, a sip, a stumble, a fainting spell, a room full of witnesses, and a story rewritten in an instant. Poor Avery, worked too hard, could not handle the pressure, not mentally strong enough. No one would question it. They had spent years shaping that narrative for me. Tonight was simply the final touch. But something shifted inside me the moment I saw the powder bloom into the liquid. Not fear, not panic, something quieter. A sense of clarity so sharp it felt like stepping into focus after years of living slightly blurred. The hook in my mind was simple. If they were willing to sabotage my future in a room full of hundreds of people, what else had they been willing to rewrite behind closed doors? I lifted the glass, not to drink it, not to confront them, but to carry it. Across the ballroom, through the glow of chandeliers, past the tables filled with people who believed they knew my family, I walked straight to Brielle. She looked up, laughing at something a donor had said. Her smile was bright, and for a moment I almost saw her as someone separate from the machine our parents had built around her. Then she turned that perfect smile toward me. Avery, you finally made it. I held out the glass like an offering. You always prefer the warmer one, yours feels colder. She did not hesitate. She traded without a second thought. She always trusted me. That was the part my parents never understood. They had built a world where I was meant to be invisible. But being invisible meant they never looked closely enough to notice when I was watching. As I walked back to my seat, I felt the weight of the moment settle around me. The room kept buzzing with conversation. The music kept flowing. No one saw what had just happened. The story had already begun to shift, and no one even knew they were in it. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was the night the Morgans finally learned that I was done shrinking. This was the night their script began to fall apart in front of everyone. People always ask how a family arrives at a moment like the one in the ballroom. How a father learns to slip something into his daughter's drink without trembling. How a mother can smile at a room full of strangers while silently preparing the perfect story to explain away her own child's humiliation. They act as if darkness appears out of nowhere, as if it blooms suddenly, violently, but I knew better. Darkness grows slowly, quietly, one small erasure at a time. As I took my seat again, the music drifting around me, I felt the old memories stirring, not painful ones, exactly, more like a series of small, sharp cuts that had stopped bleeding long ago, but never fully healed. Cuts that explained why my father's hand over that champagne glass did not feel like a shock. It felt like a continuation. The first time I understood my place in the Morgan family, I was 8 years old. It was the district science fair, held in a cafeteria that smelled like crayons and warm plastic. I had spent weeks building a solar system model out of foam balls, carefully painting each planet by hand. I still remember the way my fingers stained blue and green for days afterward. My sister Brielle had forgotten her project entirely. She threw something together during recess and taped the title crooked at the top. When the judges came around, she flashed her bright smile, head tilted just enough to look effortless. They adored her. Everyone always did. When they announced her name as the winner, my parents shot to their feet so fast their chairs scraped across the floor. The sound still echoes when I think about it. Pride pouring off them like sunlight. I remember watching their silhouettes as they gathered around her, praising her, lifting her up. My name was never called, not even once. I looked down at the floor tiles, shiny under the fluorescent lights, and traced the reflections with the toe of my shoe. That was when my Aunt Meredith, my mother's older sister, leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Stand tall even when they try to shrink you." I didn't know what she meant then, but I felt something shift, a small, quiet truth settling into place. Years rolled by, and the pattern sharpened. At 14, I won a citywide debate competition. I still remember how proud I felt walking out of that auditorium with the ribbon pinned to my blazer. But before I could even share my excitement, my father told our relatives that Brielle had coached me, the girl who never read the debate prompt, who never asked a single question about my topic. When I tried to correct him, my mother gave me the look. The one that froze whatever I was about to say. The one that meant, do not change the story. So I didn't. Not because I believed them, but because over time, silence had become easier than the exhaustion of trying to be seen. Then came 16. Brielle received a used car wrapped in a giant red bow for her birthday. I got a planner, a plain one, beige cover, with the words, "Dream Big," printed across the front. My mother said it was perfect for someone who needed help staying organized. I wrote in it for a month before I realized every page felt like a reminder that there were instructions for the kind of daughter I was supposed to be. A daughter who didn't take up space. College was supposed to be the escape. And in some ways, it was. I earned scholarships purely on merit. I worked late in labs and wrote research papers that impressed professors I had only dreamed of meeting. But even then, every achievement became a shared family success. Every award I received, my parents retold as if they had handcrafted my entire path. They never said the words directly. They didn't have to. The message was always there. You are only as notable as the story we tell about you. And if that story made me small, then small was what I was expected to remain. But there was one person who never treated me like a shadow. Noah Carter. He had been in my freshman psychology seminar, the first to notice when I went quiet in group discussions, the first to ask why I paused before speaking, the first to say the words no one else had ever said out loud. "I see the way they talk over you." 8 words, simple, but they landed like a match in a room filled with dry paper. And then there was Meredith. Always calm, always steady, collecting every certificate I earned, every grant I received, keeping them in a folder she never explained. She said she wanted to make sure the truth never went missing. I didn't understand what she meant until graduation night, when I saw my father's hand hover over my glass. Suddenly, every erased moment, every stolen credit, every softened insult clicked into a single, clear line. They hadn't simply overlooked me. They had been rehearsing for this. As the string quartet shifted into another piece, I felt a quiet resolve settle into my chest. If my family had spent years shaping a narrative that kept me small, then tonight would be the moment that narrative broke. Not because I confronted them, not because I caused a scene, but because I finally understood the hook of my own story. The smallest actions reveal the biggest truths, and tonight, the smallest action was a swirl of powder in a champagne glass that my father never expected me to see. The thing about patterns is that once you finally see them, you can never unsee them again. They reveal themselves everywhere, in moments you once dismissed as coincidences or misunderstandings. After watching my father tamper with my drink, every memory from childhood to college lined up like tiles on a floor, forming a path I had already been walking without realizing it. But insight does something powerful. It sharpens the senses. It changes the way you move through a room. It teaches you to look not just at what people show you, but at what they hope you never notice. As I sat there, watching the servers glide between tables, I realized I was no longer the invisible daughter they had counted on. I was observing now, documenting, choosing, and there is nothing more dangerous to a family built on performance than a daughter who stops playing her assigned role. Across the ballroom, Brielle laughed, tossing her hair in a way that belonged on a magazine cover. I used to envy her ease, the way people seemed drawn to her like moths to a porch light. But now I could see something else, something I had never allowed myself to admit. Brielle had been raised to be the protagonist of a story that was never hers. She was the decoration, the sparkle, the proof of my parents' narrative. I was the scaffolding necessary, supportive, but always hidden behind the surface. And if the surface cracked, everything underneath cracked too. That realization made something settle in my chest, something heavy but strangely calm. If tonight shattered their script, it would not just expose what they did to me. It would expose the story they needed Brielle to play. And for the first time, the hook appeared clearly in my mind. Sometimes, the person meant to shine is the one most blinded by the light. I rose from the table, pretending to straighten the hem of my dress, and walked toward the back of the ballroom, where the kitchen doors swung open and shut. Heat from the stoves poured out in waves every time a server passed. I moved naturally, as if looking for air, as if searching for a quieter corner to breathe. But in truth, I was following instinct, an instinct that told me the real story of the night was unfolding somewhere behind the stage lights. I slipped into the narrow hallway behind the reception area. Instantly, the noise from the ballroom softened into a muffled hum. The hallway felt colder, stripped of decoration, raw and unfiltered. This was the part of events people never photographed, the backstage where truth lived. As I walked deeper down the corridor, the voices began. At first just murmurs, indistinct and rhythmic, then more defined, a tone I recognized but couldn't place. Something in me stilled. I took one step closer and found myself standing outside a partially closed service door. A thin line of light glowed beneath it. I don't know why I stayed. Maybe because silence had always been my default. Maybe because tonight silence was turning into something new, a weapon instead of a shield. I pressed my back to the wall and listened. "Just make sure she drinks it," my father's voice. Crisp, controlled, the same tone he used when finalizing real estate deals or instructing attorneys. The kind of voice that never wavered. I felt my breath freeze, not in fear, but in recognition. So there it was. Not an accident, not an exaggeration formed in my mind. A plan. My mother spoke next, her voice smooth and practiced, like she was auditioning for a role she had already mastered. "It needs to look natural, a faint spell, nothing more." People will say she seemed tired. The words tightened something high in my throat. Tired. The exact story they had always painted for me. Overwhelmed, stressed, fragile. They weren't just rewriting my accomplishments, they were preparing a narrative that would swallow me whole. Then another voice joined Mila, the event coordinator. Detached, professional, almost bored. "The toast gives us a clean moment. The room will be distracted." And suddenly it all clicked into place. Tonight wasn't the first time they had tried to shrink me. It was simply the first time they attempted to remove me from my own story entirely. My pulse steadied, not quickened. I felt strangely anchored, as if everything I had suspected for years had finally taken shape. When people reveal who they truly are, there is a kind of relief in it. A wound you can finally see is a wound you can finally stop blaming yourself for. Footsteps approached. I stepped back into the shadows just as the door opened and the three of them walked past me, my father straightening his cufflinks, my mother smoothing her dress, Mila checking her clipboard. None of them looked up. None of them imagined I might be standing there. After all, Avery Morgan never took up space. As they disappeared around the corner, I exhaled slowly and felt a decision settle quietly into place. Tonight was no longer about survival. It was about truth. And truth, once it finds a voice, never goes back to being silent. The hook was simple. If they were willing to do this to me in the dark, the light would be the only place to answer them. We've poured a lot of time and heart into creating this story. If you don't like it, give it a like anyway, and if you do enjoy it, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Now, let's get back to the story. When the hallway fell silent again, something inside me settled with it. Not peace, not shock, more like a quiet alignment, as if the truth had finally rotated into its correct position. I no longer needed to guess where I stood in the Morgan family. They had told me clearly in that dim hallway, in words I was never meant to hear. They wanted a story where I crumbled, but the moment they revealed their script, they handed me the pen. I straightened, pressing my palms once against the sides of my dress, grounding myself the way Aunt Meredith had taught me years ago. Back tall, shoulders relaxed, chin level, not defiant, just certain. The ballroom felt different when I stepped back into it. Same chandeliers, same music drifting like silk, same clusters of guests, pretending their conversations were the only ones that mattered. But the air felt thinner, as if the room had become a stage I finally understood from the wings rather than from the audience. My parents had spent years directing me. Tonight, I was done performing. I wove between the tables, quiet as a shadow but no longer feeling like one. Every step carried purpose now. Every breath felt deliberate. No one looked at me, which worked in my favor. My invisibility, the thing they had trained into me all my life, was now the perfect cover. Near the far corner of the room, I spotted Noah Carter adjusting the lens of his camera. He always worked events with a kind of artistic focus, seeing angles and moments before anyone else noticed them. When his eyes lifted and caught mine, I saw the question in them. Did something happen? I didn't nod. I didn't blink. I simply moved close enough to speak under the hum of the quartet. You recorded the glass, right? His hand tightened slightly around the camera. I did. His voice barely rose above a whisper, clear as day. Keep it safe, I murmured. Not yet. He studied my face for a brief second, long enough to understand that something deeper was unfolding, something that required patience, not panic. Noah had always possessed an uncanny ability to sense the emotional temperature of a room, of me, and whatever he saw in my eyes now, it told him to trust my silence. He slipped the camera back to his side and melted into the crowd again. I stood still for a moment, letting the room breathe around me. The realization was growing inside me, blooming slowly. If they wanted a narrative, they were about to lose control of it. Across the ballroom, Brielle lifted her glass, the one she had unknowingly taken from me. She was laughing with a small group of guests, radiant in that easy, natural way she'd been taught her whole life. She was not my enemy. She was my mirror, a reflection of what happens when a child is raised at the center of a story instead of at the edge. But the powder my father added to the champagne did not care about stories. It would do exactly what it was meant to do: make the drinker dizzy, disoriented, embarrassed. Brielle lifted the glass again, waiting for the toast. I inhaled slowly, letting the realization settle. My parents had scripted the evening so carefully, they didn't even consider someone else might step into my scene. I walked back to my table and lowered myself into the chair. The champagne flute I held now was untouched, harmless. The glass that was supposed to define my entire future was no longer mine. For the first time in my life, the power was in the quiet. I glanced toward the stage where Mila, the event coordinator, stood ready to cue the next moment in the program. She checked her tablet, whispered to a staff member, and signaled the AV team at the back. Everything was falling into place exactly the way my parents intended. Only now I was inside the gears of their plan, and silence was my leverage. As the microphone clicked on, the guests began to quiet. A ripple of attention passed through the room. Mila stepped forward, her sequined dress catching light and scattering it across the tables. In just a few minutes, the toast would begin. My father's smile would be fixed, my mother's posture perfect, Brielle's glass raised, and the narrative would write itself, unless I rewrote it first. My breath steadied, my hands were calm. I had spent years waiting to be acknowledged, but tonight was not about acknowledgement. Tonight was about clarity. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is let a story reach its breaking point. The thought pulsed through me with a steady rhythm. I was no longer hiding in the margins of their story. I was the line they forgot to control. And once a forgotten line rises to the surface, it changes the entire page. As the room held its collective breath, waiting for the toast that would set everything in motion, I leaned back slightly and let my eyes move across the crowd. Tonight, I would not be erased. Tonight, silence would speak for me. And if you have ever been pushed to the edges of your own family, tell me in the comments. Number 1. The air inside the ballroom shifted the moment Mila touched the microphone. It was subtle, barely more than a breath, but I felt it like the room inhaled a script it had been coached to perform. Glasses lifted, conversations quieted. My parents straightened simultaneously, their smiles polished into perfection. They believed the toast would be the peak of the night, the moment their narrative locked into place. But narratives built on control always crack at the edges first. Noah moved closer to the stage, blending with the cluster of guests, holding their phones up to record the toast. To anyone else, he looked like another photographer, capturing the moment, but his camera held the one thing my family never anticipated: the truth. I could tell he was waiting for my signal, though I hadn't given one yet. There was something grounding about that, knowing someone in the room wasn't working from my parents' script, someone who saw what others chose to ignore. For years I had wondered whether my experiences were exaggerated by my own sensitivity, whether maybe I was imagining the erasure. But Noah's gaze told me I wasn't crazy. I was finally visible to someone. Mila raised her hand for silence. All eyes drifted toward the podium. My father stood, adjusting his cufflinks in that meticulous way he always used to center himself before speaking. My mother rested her hand on his arm, a gesture meant to look affectionate but rehearsed enough to feel hollow. "Tonight we celebrate a remarkable young woman," he began. My breath stilled, not because of his words, but because I knew how the sentence would end. A remarkable young woman was the kind of phrase that could be twisted, sharpened, molded into whatever version of me they needed the world to see. I waited for it, the pivot, the undercurrent, the subtle reframing. Our daughter has always given everything she had, even when it cost her more than anyone realized. There it was, the seed of fragility, the gentle prelude to the moment they planned to redefine my entire image. Once Brielle drank enough to show the symptoms: dizziness, confusion, weakness, they would cast me as overwhelmed, insecure, the daughter who buckled under pressure. That was the story they wanted to walk out of this room with. But timing is a funny thing. Control is even funnier, because just as my father lifted his champagne glass, just as the room leaned in to hear the next line, Brielle took a slow sip from hers. I saw it. I felt it. The entire world seemed to tilt slightly as the rim touched her lips. She swallowed with a bright, unbothered expression, the same way she had done everything all her life, confident the spotlight belonged to her. Only this time, the spotlight wasn't going to soften her. It was going to expose everything. Her smile held for a moment, then flickered. Just barely. The kind of flicker most people would miss, but not me. I had spent my entire life memorizing the micro-expressions in my family. I saw the slight tightening around her eyes, the shift in her balance, as she placed a hand lightly on the back of her chair. She blinked, slow. Then again. Confusion washed across her face, subtle but unmistakable. For the first time in my life, Brielle looked uncertain. My mother saw it too. Her posture sharpened, her smile wavered. She leaned forward, just a fraction, but enough to break her polished composure. My father paused mid-sentence. His eyes darted to my sister, then back to me, searching for a narrative to grab onto. But narratives only hold when the story cooperates. And tonight, their story was slipping through their fingers. Around the room, whispers rose like a low tide. Guests watched Brielle steady herself, her hand pressing against her temple. A soft murmur rippled through the tables. It wasn't dramatic, not yet, but it didn't have to be. Embarrassment, the very tool they meant to use against me, had begun to shift in another direction entirely. I could feel the tension, the unraveling, the fear behind my parents' eyes, the same fear I had lived under for years, now reflected back at them, powerfully quiet. That was the hook of the night, the one truth they never saw coming. Revenge wasn't loud. It didn't need an audience. It didn't need a scream. It only needed a moment. And the moment was here. Noah stepped forward slightly, angling his camera toward Brielle, and then toward the stage. He was ready. I could sense the anticipation in the room, changing shape, tilting away from the script my parents had prepared, and toward something rawer, truer. I lowered my champagne glass, untouched and steady in my hand, and felt a calm settle over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for the blow. I was watching it land exactly where it belonged. The room leaned into the tension, waiting for my father to recover the narrative. But narratives built on lies never survive the truth. If you've ever watched the people who underestimated you begin to realize their mistake, hit like so, this story reaches someone who needs it. The moment Brielle's fingers curled around the edge of the table, the ballroom's energy changed. It wasn't dramatic, not yet. It was the kind of shift only people who know how to look for small fractures can see. Her smile, always polished and camera-ready, began to fray at the edges. Her pupils widened slightly, her breath grew uneven, and in that instant, I saw something I had never seen in my sister: uncertainty. All my life, Brielle moved with the confidence of someone who had been told, repeatedly, that the world would make room for her. She never hesitated, never stumbled, never questioned her place at the center of the stage. But now, as the effects of the powder seeped into her bloodstream, the stage she'd always owned suddenly felt unstable. My father's voice faltered at the podium. It was almost imperceptible, a stutter, a missed beat, but for a man who prided himself on perfect delivery, it was enough to betray the panic flaring behind his eyes. My mother noticed too. Her hand tightened around her champagne flute until the glass trembled. She leaned toward Brielle, whispering something that was supposed to sound supportive, but came out sharp, rushed, desperate. But the room wasn't supposed to notice any of this. The script hadn't accounted for their golden daughter showing symptoms before the toast had even finished. Yet here we were, and I was watching everything unfold like a scene I had rehearsed in silence for years. Noah had repositioned himself, 2 tables away, camera angled in a way that looked casual, but was perfectly placed to capture Brielle's change. His attention flicked briefly to me, steady, focused, waiting. He was the only person who understood that this moment wasn't an accident. It was the result of years of choices, years of silence, years of being pushed to the margins, until the margin finally moved. I exhaled slowly, letting my fingers tap lightly against the stem of my untouched champagne glass. The room buzzed with soft whispers, the kind that start small but spread through a crowd like static. People leaned toward each other, murmuring, watching. Is she okay? She doesn't look well. Is she dizzy? What's happening to her? The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the story my parents intended for me. The daughter who couldn't handle pressure, the weak one, the fragile one, the one who buckled under stress. But when you build your life on a script, you forget one crucial truth. Scripts fall apart when the wrong character delivers the wrong lines. My father cleared his throat, attempting to recover the moment. Let us continue. As I was saying, but he couldn't finish. Every eye had shifted, not toward him, but toward Brielle. His voice, once commanding, now floated aimlessly over a room that no longer cared to listen. My mother reached for Brielle's arm, masking panic behind a thin smile. She whispered urgently, but I could tell it wasn't comfort, it was control. She wasn't worried about her daughter's well-being. She was worried about the optics. As the whispers grew louder, my father's jaw tightened. He looked at Brielle, then at the guests, then finally at me. Our eyes locked. For the first time in my life, he looked unsure. And I didn't look away. The truth between us was silent, electric, unmistakable. He knew what I knew. The question hovering between us wasn't what happened. It was who knew. I rose from my chair, not rushing, not drawing attention, just moving, deliberate, calm, like someone who belonged in the center of the room instead of the edges. My footsteps felt unnervingly steady, as if my body had been waiting years to stand tall without waiting for permission. Noah adjusted his camera again, following my movement with the instinct of someone who understood transitions, narrative, emotional, visual. He didn't need direction. He knew the story was shifting. Everything felt suspended, as if time itself paused to watch. My father stepped back from the podium, My mother hovered like a shadow behind Brielle. Guests parted subtly, their curiosity pulling them into the moment even if they didn't understand it yet. I stopped just a few feet from the stage. Looking at them, my family, perfectly posed yet unraveling, I felt something I never expected. Not triumph, not revenge, just clarity. This was the moment the truth began to breathe. This was the moment their perfect story met reality. This was the moment I had spent years shrinking away from, without realizing it was waiting for me. I placed my glass gently on the nearest table. The sound was soft, almost delicate, but it echoed inside me louder than any applause I'd ever received, because I knew what came next. The reveal wasn't going to be explosive. It wasn't going to be chaotic. It was going to be undeniable. Truth doesn't need theatrics. It just needs light. And Noah had the light ready in his hands. Before the room shifted into the next heartbeat of chaos, a question flickered through my mind, one I knew would ignite debate for anyone hearing this story. If your family tried to destroy your future to protect their reputation, would you expose them? If you have an opinion, comment below. I want to know where you stand. The room held its breath without realizing it. Every whisper that had rippled through the crowd just moments before seemed to dissolve into the chandelier light. Brielle sat back down slowly, her hand still pressed to her temple, her eyes fluttering like she was fighting to stay balanced. My parents hovered in panic, beautifully dressed, perfectly composed, but trembling beneath the surface. And I knew then that the moment I had been walking toward all night was waiting for me. Not dramatic, not loud, just decisive. Noah shifted his stance subtly, his camera catching the light as he followed my steps. He was ready. The truth was ready. Now it was only a matter of choosing the right place to release it. I walked along the edge of the ballroom, moving toward the AV booth in the far corner. The technician stood inside, half hidden behind panels of blinking equipment. He couldn't have been much older than me, mid-20s, maybe wearing a black headset and an expression of mild boredom. He wasn't part of anyone's theater tonight. He wasn't loyal to my parents' performance. He was simply a facilitator of whatever needed to appear on the screen. Perfect. He looked up when I stepped inside. "Can I help you?" His tone was polite, neutral. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know the story unfolding behind him. That anonymity was a gift. "I need this played," I said quietly, sliding a small USB drive onto the console. He blinked. "Now?" "Yes, right now." He hesitated only a second, long enough to glance at the ballroom, then at me, then back at the USB, as if weighing whether this was a risk worth taking. But something in my expression must have told him everything he needed to know, because he nodded. "All right." His fingers moved across the controls with quick, practiced confidence. The ballroom screen flickered once, just as my father attempted to reclaim the room with a forced laugh and a line about how overwhelming graduation nights can be. The slideshow of family photos froze, then vanished. In its place appeared a still frame, one single moment captured so clearly it cut through the air like a blade. My father's hand, hovering over a champagne glass, a swirl of powder blooming into the bubbles. The room didn't just fall silent, it collapsed into silence. Every head turned toward the screen. My father's voice stopped mid-sentence. My mother's smile died so quickly, it barely resembled her face. Brielle stared, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. And the video began to play. There was no sound, there didn't need to be. Noah had captured everything in a crisp, steady frame. My father's posture angled to block the view, the subtle tilt of his wrist, the powder drifting downward, dissolving with quiet precision. The entire ballroom watched the truth unfold in real time. No dramatic music, no narration, just an image so clean and damning that no explanation could soften it. My father stepped forward, a hand raised as if he could physically shield the screen from 100 pairs of eyes. "This is taken out of context," he stammered. But the video kept playing. It showed the moment I approached Brielle. It showed the glass in my hand. It showed the exchange smooth, natural, unforced. It showed Brielle lifting the glass to her lips. The truth was not loud. It was undeniable. Gasps broke out across the room. Not dramatic screams, just soft inhales of disbelief. The kind that signal something inside a crowd has shifted permanently. My mother's face paled. She reached for my father's arm, whispering something through clenched teeth, but her words were nothing compared to the image in front of them. The screen had become a mirror, and they were finally being forced to look at themselves. I stepped out from the shadows near the AV booth, letting the light catch me as I walked toward the center of the ballroom. People moved aside without realizing they had moved. Some stared at me, some stared at the screen, some stared at my parents as if seeing them for the first time. My father tried again. "Avery, this is..." But the room wasn't listening to him anymore. It was listening to the truth, and that was the hook they never saw coming. A single recorded moment can undo years of carefully rehearsed lies. When I reached the front of the room, the screen paused on a frame of my father's hand over the glass, still, damning, impossible to rewrite. The image glowed behind me like a spotlight finally aimed at the right person. I spoke softly. "You wanted a story tonight." 100 eyes fixed on me. My parents froze. I lifted my chin. "So here it is. Thank you for staying with us this far. If you're busy or need to step away right now, hit like so you can easily find this video again later. Now, let's get back to the story." The moment the video froze on the screen, my father's hand suspended above the champagne glass, the ballroom felt less like a celebration and more like a courtroom. No judge, no lawyers, just 100 witnesses, and the truth glowing in high definition. My father opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His polished charisma, the kind he carried into every boardroom and charity gala, evaporated under the weight of the evidence. My mother tried to step forward, but even she seemed to realize that any movement would only draw more attention. For the first time in my life, the room wasn't bending itself toward them, it was bending toward the truth. Brielle's breathing slowed as she stared at the screen, her hand still resting on her temple. I watched her shift through confusion, fear, dawning clarity, and something else, something like betrayal. She finally understood what she had swallowed wasn't meant for her. The truth hit her with the same quiet force the powder was meant to hit me. Her eyes flicked to me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't blame. It was recognition. She realized she had always been protected, just not in the way she thought. The guests murmured louder now, no longer trying to hide their shock. Did he drug his own daughter? Was that supposed to be Avery? Why would parents do that? I stood in the center of it all, not speaking yet, letting the silence finish what the video started. Silence has its own voice, and sometimes it delivers justice more cleanly than shouting ever could. Across the room, someone stepped forward. Aunt Meredith. She didn't rush. She didn't huff with indignation. She moved with the same quiet certainty she had taught me all my life. She carried a thin folder, one I recognized instantly, the one she had shown me years ago, the one she had spent years building quietly while no one paid attention. She walked straight past my parents and stopped beside me. Her presence felt like truth taking shape. She opened the folder without looking at the room, as if the documents inside mattered more than the eyes watching her. "These," she said, her voice calm but resonant, "belong to Avery." She held up scholarship certificates, research grants, receipts showing I paid my own tuition, academic awards rewritten in family stories as Brielle's mentorship, internship letters my parents claimed had been arranged through their connections but were earned entirely on merit. Every page she lifted was a correction to the narrative my parents had built for years. I didn't know she had saved all of this. I thought I had been collecting small victories in a vacuum. But there she was, my quiet, steady anchor, bringing the proof to light. My mother stepped forward, the edges of panic cracking her perfect posture. "Meredith, stop. This is unnecessary." "Unnecessary." Meredith turned her gaze toward her, calm as stone. "You've rewritten her for years. Tonight the story returns to its owner." Gasps followed. People shifted, giving space not out of respect, but out of discomfort. The Morgan family elegance was unraveling thread by thread, and not one single person could weave it back together. My father tried again, desperation cutting through his voice. "Avery, sweetheart, listen." Sweetheart, a word he only used when trying to tighten control. I finally lifted my chin and met his gaze head on. "I am listening," I said quietly. "I have been listening my entire life." The weight of those words pressed into the air. Guests weren't whispering anymore. They were staring openly, watching a family so perfect on the outside fracture in real time. Brielle pushed herself to her feet unsteadily. One hand pressed to the table, she looked at my father, as if seeing him from a place she had never stood before. Her voice trembled. Was this supposed to happen to me? Or was it supposed to happen to her? The question sliced through the room. My father looked trapped, caught between the truth and the story he wished he could still control. My mother tried to step toward Brielle, but she shook her head, taking a tiny step backward. For the first time, Brielle wasn't moving toward the center of the story. She was stepping out of it. I turned slightly, still facing the room, and spoke clearly. You wanted a story tonight, but stories built on lies eventually choke on the truth. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was done shrinking. I let the silence absorb the words, let the weight settle over every corner of the ballroom. And in that moment, something became unmistakably clear. This wasn't the night my family fell apart. It was the night their version of me fell apart. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small, I felt free. Sometimes the truth doesn't destroy the person it targets. Sometimes it destroys the people who feared it the most. When the final frame of the video dissolved into darkness, the ballroom didn't breathe for several long seconds. It was as if the entire room had been holding itself together by ritual clinking glasses, polite applause, curated smiles, and now that the truth had shattered the ritual, no one knew what to do with their hands, their eyes, their voices. I stepped back, not in retreat, but in recognition. My part was done. The truth didn't need me to explain it. It knew how to echo on its own. Behind me, the crowd shifted like a tide pulling away from shore. People instinctively stepped back from my parents, as if their perfection had been a shared illusion everyone suddenly woke up from. Soft gasps still drifted through the air, but now they carried the weight of something irreversible. My father's shoulders had collapsed inward, the way buildings sag before they fall. He kept opening and closing his mouth, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. My mother, always composed, always immaculate, looked as if someone had pulled the floor out from under her. The brittle edges of her confidence cracked in real time. But it was Brielle who drew my eyes. She sat perfectly still, the dizziness fading from her expression, replaced by something quieter and far more painful: understanding. She wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was looking at our parents like she didn't recognize the people standing there. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the radiant center of their story, she was the collateral damage, and she finally knew it. Her voice, when it came, was small and unsteady. Why was this meant for her? Her eyes flicked toward me, then toward the empty champagne glass in her hand. My father tried to reach her, but she recoiled, not dramatically, just enough to show the fracture, enough to show she had broken through the story she'd been fed her entire life. I didn't move toward her. I didn't need to. This wasn't the moment for reconciliation or confrontation. This was the moment for truth, to settle exactly where it belonged. Someone in the crowd whispered, "I can't believe they did that." Another murmured, "Imagine drugging your own daughter." The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It was an autopsy, and everyone was watching the narrative die. I felt the air thinning around me, pressing against my skin, urging me to step outside, not to run, just to breathe without the weight of other people's eyes, other people's expectations. So I turned and walked out. No one stopped me. No one called after me. The room was too busy unraveling itself to notice the one person who had quietly stopped shrinking. The hallway outside was cool, dim, almost gentle. The contrast made my chest loosen in a way I hadn't expected. I followed the corridor toward the balcony overlooking the water, the same place where I had stood earlier, before everything shifted, before the story turned itself inside out. The night air washed over me, crisp and steady. City lights trembled across the surface of the water, scattering reflections like broken gold. I rested my hands on the railing and let the silence settle into me. Not heavy, not lonely, just honest. Behind me, through the closed doors, I could still feel the chaos. Not hear it, feel it. The way tension vibrates through walls. The way truth, once released, moves like an electrical current, sparking confusion, anger, disbelief, but none of it belonged to me anymore. For years, I had carried the weight of a narrative that wasn't mine, one where my achievements were minimized, my voice softened, my presence rewritten. But standing on that balcony, looking out at a city that didn't know me and didn't expect anything from me, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. Freedom. Not dramatic, not defiant. Just spacious. The question that floated into my mind surprised me. What do you do after your family's story collapses, and you finally step into your own? I didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time, I wanted to find it. The balcony light flickered slightly as the wind picked up. I closed my eyes, let the air move through me, and understood something simple but powerful. Truth doesn't ruin you. It ruins the version of you they invented to control, and when that version dies, you finally get to decide who you actually are. A small laugh escaped me, tired, relieved, almost disbelieving, not because the situation was funny, but because sometimes life hands you a plot twist so wild you can't help but laugh at the timing. I thought about the ballroom behind me, thought about the guests trying to piece together what just happened, thought about the moment my father's face froze on the screen, and a ridiculous thought popped into my head. Some people have family drama, some people have family disasters, but me, I apparently have a family season finale. If you were standing on that balcony with me, honestly, what would you have done next? Comment your answer. Make it funny. I think we all need the laugh. I stayed on the balcony longer than I intended, letting the night settle everything the ballroom had shaken loose. The city lights shimmered on the water below, as if the whole skyline was exhaling with me. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing myself. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't searching for the right angle to exist without upsetting someone. I was simply standing, breathing, mine. Footsteps approached behind me, not hurried, not panicked, soft, deliberate. They stopped a few feet away, leaving a respectful space between us. Avery. It was Brielle. Her voice didn't carry the glossy confidence she wore like perfume. Tonight, it sounded like something stripped of performance, just a girl, unsteady and unsure, stepping out of a role she had never realized she was playing. I turned slightly, enough to see her face in the faint light. The dizziness had faded, but what replaced it was a deeper kind of disorientation, the kind that comes when the truth forces you to see your life from the outside for the first time. She swallowed once. I didn't know about any of it. I believed her. Surprisingly, completely. For all the ways my parents had shaped her, they had kept her sheltered from the ugliness too. She had been the star of their story, not the author. She never had a reason to look backstage. I nodded. You weren't meant to know. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She wasn't broken, just untethered, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at me like competition or comparison. She was looking at me like someone trying to understand the full picture for the first time. Why you? Why would they hurt you like that? I took a slow breath. My answer wasn't rehearsed, because I stopped fitting the version of me they needed, and when a family needs a story more than they need a daughter, they'll do anything to protect the story. Brielle closed her eyes. A soft, pained sound escaped her, the sound of a truth landing exactly where it needed to land. I didn't move toward her. I didn't comfort her. But I didn't push her away either. Some moments don't require action, just honesty. The doors behind us opened again, and Aunt Meredith stepped into the cool night air. She wasn't flustered, not even after the spectacle inside. She carried herself with the calm of someone who had waited years to see the truth come into the light. She rested her hand gently on my shoulder. You did exactly what needed to be done. I let myself lean into her touch, for a fraction of a second, the kind of grounding I didn't know I'd been craving. What's happening in there now? I asked. Meredith gave a soft, almost amused sigh. Your parents are discovering what happens when people stop believing the version of events they create. I imagined the scene. Guests stepping away, investors whispering, my father's voice cracking, my mother scrambling for control in a room that no longer granted her any. And for the first time, none of it hurt. It felt distant, detached, like a play I had stepped out of mid-performance and finally realized I had never wanted the role. Brielle hesitated. Do you want to come back in? Her question wasn't naive. It was hopeful, a small, trembling attempt at connection. I shook my head softly. No, that story isn't mine anymore. The wind shifted, brushing my hair across my cheek. A sense of clarity washed over me, clean, sharp, steady. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking away from who they told me I was. And that is a very different kind of leaving. I stepped toward the railing again, inhaling deeply. I didn't know what the future looked like. I didn't have a perfect plan. But I felt something powerful take root inside me. Freedom isn't loud. It's the moment you stop asking someone else for permission to exist. Behind me, the ballroom hummed with the aftermath of truth. Ahead of me, the night opened wide and endless. I glanced once over my shoulder, at the two women standing behind me, one who had unknowingly lived at the center of a lie, and one who had protected the truth quietly for years. Then I walked away from the balcony, toward the elevator, toward whatever came next. My footsteps echoed lightly against the marble floor, each one shedding another old version of myself, another expectation, another script, another shadow. And in that quiet, I understood the real hook of my story. Sometimes the moment everything falls apart is the exact moment you finally come together. As the elevator doors slid shut, I let the smallest smile curve across my lips. If you've ever rebuilt yourself after someone tried to rewrite you, stay with me. There are more truths to tell, more stories to reclaim, more victories that start in silence. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because my story isn't ending here. It's finally beginning.